This is subject 1 of module 2 of the Diploma course. It's a chance for you to ask questions as we go, to help you to understand the material you've been reading and studying, and a chance for me to elaborate on some of that material as well. So, what do we mean when we use the word cosmogenesis? I think that it's a compound of two words, which are cosmos and genesis. So cosmos is basically everything, isn't it?
Genesis, beginning?
And Genesis, Beryl is telling me, is the beginning. So it's the beginning of everything then. It's quite a brave, bold idea really to discuss the beginning of everything, isn't it? But then you see, for the body of knowledge that we call Theosophy, it's very basic stuff. Science is interested in what it calls cosmology, which is the same subject, and has made quite significant strides in the last 100 years, culminating most recently in its theory of the Big Bang, which is how it explains how all the cosmos came into being. But there are big holes in the Big Bang theory, and even scientists themselves admit this. As a consequence, there's been a raft of other theories given out in the last 10 years, none of which has really stuck. But Theosophy has a lot to say about the beginning of the universe or the cosmos. It goes into great detail, in fact, and scientists can't really use that knowledge because it can't be demonstrated either in the laboratory or through mathematics. And if science can't do either of those things, then it won't accept a theory as workable or a good hypothesis. However, Einstein was very taken with Theosophy. He recommended it to all his colleagues, and there's no doubt that his understanding of Theosophy influenced greatly his achievements in science, particularly his theory of relativity. So, what science says about the Big Bang is that it says that the stars and the rest of the material in the universe appears to be spreading outwards from some central point, a point which you can't identify, but nevertheless, looking at the movement of the celestial bodies, it sees them spreading outwards. So it postulates then that if they're all spreading outward from a central point, they must have started from that central point. It postulates then that the central point was in fact what they term a singularity. And a singularity, for me and you, is just a single unit. There are no complications to it, it's a single unit. This would be smaller than an atom, because all atoms in the cosmos would be contained within it, somehow, in a compressed state. Now their theory is that this compression into this singularity, into this one point, produced so much pressure that eventually something had to give and it bursts outwards. So then that is the Big Bang, because it's a bang that is still continuing to this day, in their terms anyway, as all the celestial bodies are still moving away from that point. They also say, of course, that in that exploding out, basic elements were formed and matter was formed from that gradually as the process proceeded. They put the timing of that at about 15 billion years. Now, in contrast to that, Theosophy puts the age of the universe a lot older than that. Something like 1,000,000 times older than that. And the reason for that is that because Theosophy says that the universe didn't start at the physical level, that was where it virtually came to its final conclusion of being born. But it actually was born on the spiritual plane, which is several levels of finer degree, way beyond and within and behind the physical. What we call quantum physics is only the tip of an iceberg of this depth of field of energy, which Theosophy looks at and catalogues and goes into great detail about. So then we have to ask ourselves then, in theosophical terms, what is the theosophical Big Bang then? Where did it start from the theosophical point of view? Now, in this course so far, we have looked at this point from a different point of view, haven't we? We looked at it from the point of view of a universal law, because we wanted to know where laws come from. And we said that when a universe begins, it remembers the last time that it was existing, and the laws are a combination of that process and remembered by and embodied in the beings that are issued forth at the start of the universe. So we have said that there is not just one universe stroke cosmos, but a series of them. A series which, for all we know, is endless. And that our cosmos, this present universe, is only one of many. And I don't have a problem with that. I know scientists would have a problem with it, because they say, well, you can't prove that. I don't care about proving these things. I look around in my life and in the world around me for similar things that are taking place. So what is there around us and in our lives that is similar to a series of many universes? Can you?
Yeah, reincarnation.
Reincarnation. But again, we can't prove that either, can we? But do we care? No. But we can see it in much younger life forms, such as plants, where they die off in the winter and then are born again, come to life again in the spring. So taking that as a very basic raw template, we've got this idea of life burgeoning, spring, flowering in summer, fruiting or getting older and starting to decay in autumn, and then going into this hibernation in winter. And actually, Theosophy says that's exactly what the cosmos does. So when we talk about the Big Bang, either science or theosophical, we're talking about the spring, when everything comes back to life again. The winter that preceded that, Theosophy calls pralaya. It's the night of Brahm, like our night when we go to sleep. So we have these two alternating cycles of activity and rest, activity and rest, activity and rest, just like our lives are the same. Every day is a new activity, every night is another rest. And then in the longer term, every lifetime is an activity, and every life, afterlife, between lives is a rest, and then a new life again. So this is why I don't care about proof, and why it doesn't matter, because I see enough evidence around me in life to support this. And this is a rule, actually, of metaphysics or occultism. When you come across a theory or some kind of teaching or doctrine that states how a thing is, then look around it for confirmation, because if it's true in one sense, there should be correspondences in every other sense. And I think we've just gone through that, haven't we? So that satisfies me anyway. But yeah.
Do scientists not accept the cyclical nature of things?
Well, they do, but they're not to the
But
point
not
of view of the
in
universe.
relation to the-
But some scientists now are doing exactly that. I can't give you names, but following on from the Big Bang and its acceptance generally, and then further thinking and it's the doubts creeping in, other younger probably scientists have come along and said, well, maybe it's just one of many. Looking around us, they have said this, but so far it's not been accepted widely enough by the scientific community to be alongside the Big Bang itself. Because that would mean they'd have to stretch their thinking to the point of what would happen after this outward motion has finished. So some scientists say it'll all contract again, then back to the single point again. But there's no evidence for that, you see, because it's still moving out.
Yeah, that young man, Cox, the scientist.
Yeah.
He got to the point of showing what would happen to our world as it closed down, dying more or less.
Yeah.
But he didn't just take the next step and
No,
say,
so it would reborn again.
No.
Brian Cox,
He accepted that
Professor Brian Cox.
there would be
A decay.
no, completely, he said.
Yeah. I mean, science for decades and decades now, I don't know how many decades, a long time now, have postulated this theory of entropy, where they say that every living thing has within it, built into it, a factor called entropy, which is its own death, its own decay. It's on a timer waiting to happen. But you see, in millions of years from now, if science looks out at the cosmos and sees everything shrinking back again, they will then say, we know now that it's going back to the same point. But that still doesn't say that it'll come out again, does it? But it will give them a good indication that there is a cyclic action going on here. So basically, this world, this universe, this cosmos is an outward effect of a greater reality within. Just as you and I are. These bodies are outward effects of our spiritual selves within. Alright? It's our spiritual self that seeks rebirth time and time again, just as it is the spiritual self of the cosmos which does that very same thing. Now that spiritual self of the cosmos, we call it the Absolute. Religions call it God and other names. Theosophy, following on from Madame Blavatsky, calls it the Absolute because she says there's nothing else. It is everything. But it's a principle, it's a process rather than a being. And it has these phases, activity and rest. So we're going to be concerned now with what happens when it wakes up. We've been previously into what it was doing when it was asleep. And now we're going to look at what it's doing when it wakes up. I'm going to read from an extract from The Wisdom and the Way, which is a course I wrote about 8 years ago, and this is the section on cosmogenesis. I'm going to read this because it's put quite succinctly, I think, and I can't do better off the top of my head today. The ancient teachings tell us that the first thing that happens in a waking up or welling up of the creative purpose into the virgin matter of space. The Vedic scriptures are written in the old language of Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, the terms used are Parabrahman, which is the unmanifest consciousness, spirit or fire, and Mulaka Priti, which is Mula, which means root, and Prakriti means nature, in other words, root nature, or mother nature, or root matter. These two are opposite poles of the divine or absolute, in its state of rest between creations. It is as though the spirit sleeps wrapped in the veil of virgin matter, brooding through the interminable eons of rest or pralaya. When it wakes up, it does so within the virgin space, and in so doing impregnates it with its will or seed. Virgin space, this is the space or the darkness of Genesis that was on the face of the deep. It is described as matter with its three conditions in absolute balance. And these conditions are inertia, motion and rhythm. When spirit wakes up, it disturbs this balance and causes a ceaseless activity from that point on. Spirit also expresses three aspects, which is singular, dual and triple, or will, capacity and activity. And once these three aspects unfold, the term used is the Logos, or the triple Logos, which in Christian terms is the Holy Trinity. The first outpouring of this Logos is by the third aspect, which we call Thohat. It has various different names in different cultures and scriptures and traditions, but all of them signify the same quality. Its quality is fire. So bear this in mind, it's fire. And it is an expansive, fiery force. More accurately, Thohat is the fire or light aspect of divine consciousness. Thohat manifests at all levels. Some is called Akasha, or the astral light, Chi, electricity, Kundalini, and so on. However, it is what Thohat does that is the most interesting. Now, to begin with, Thohat digs holes in the raw substance of space, the Mother Deep. And these holes are like bubbles containing the fire of Thohat as it wells up within it. The whole of the space that has been circumscribed for the new creation is soon filled with them. And next Thohat works in a spiral motion, drawing these bubbles into strings, which it links in the form of a double helix. This is remarkably like the DNA molecule. In this way, the first plane of matter is formed, called the Logoic plane, due to it being the plane of manifestation of the Logos. 7 subtypes. There is a limit to the arrangement of these, and there are 7 subtypes and 7 types. When that limit is reached, Thohat takes these basic worlds and combines them into denser combinations. Right. So that's how the process starts, and from that we must elaborate further. It's a bit like when you put a kettle on to boil a pan of water. If you stand there and look into the pan, eventually you see bubbles forming on the bottom, and then they get bigger and then they float to the surface. And as the pan gets hotter and the water gets hotter, more and more bubbles form, till in the end it's a boiling mass of bubbles, isn't it? That's a very good analogy, albeit very simple, of what Thohat is doing with its expansive, fiery nature in this virgin space. This is empty, abstract space. No stars, no material in it. Just space. So by welling up in that space with its own nature, it is filling that space with its nature in the form of contained bubbles. This is really clever, this. It's like this is getting something from nothing, because like these are just holes really in nothing. But what they are is little areas of Thohat which are expanding and then held within a limit. Now these bubbles are then strung together, spun together in strings to form a double helix. And that is, by all reckoning, is a molecule of those holes. And although they're only holes, they're totally different now to the rest of the space, because they contain Thohat. And Thohat is this energy, basic energy of the universe. So by that method then, the first molecules or atoms of spiritual space are produced. And by recombining them up to its set limit, which is 7, it combines them to produce 7 basic types of molecule, each more heavier than the rest, than the other. Each one of those it can subdivide into 7 more types. So you get 49 states of this spiritual plane in terms of these spiritual atoms or molecules. But at that point it has reached a limit. The limit which is set by previous cosmoses or universes. It can't go any further than that. So what it does then, in a sense, it has to build up its energy to do this all again on a higher level. Not on a higher level, that's wrong. On a deeper level. Because somehow it's got to take these molecules, the heaviest of these molecules or atoms, and actually start spinning those into a whole new range of 7 times 7 molecules or atoms. To do that, it has to overcome the inertia which it's pushed against to reach this limit of 7 times 7. When it does so, though, it bursts out into another series. And this is a bit like the Big Bang, as it bursts into what will become another plane by somehow overcoming its inertia and pushing its limits to that next level. So then another 7 times 7 molecules made up of the previous molecules is then producing another but denser plane. And it does this all in all 7 times. And the 7th time it does this is the physical plane and physical atoms. So now we see what's inside the physical atom. When we start to look at inside the atom and we start to look at quantum particles, we're starting to see the finer atoms that are making up this physical atom. And if we were to break open them, we would find even more particles making up those, and so on, right back to the spiritual plane itself and those initial spiritual atoms that were produced by Holyhead. It's quite remarkable to think that, you see, at the end of the day, there is only energy. So when you talk about substance, you're only talking about energy in a certain pattern, aren't you? This paper is energy in a pattern we call paper. This nose is energy in a pattern I call my nose. Not very good nose, but you can sniff with it. That's about all I can do. But you see what I mean? What matters is that Holyhead manages to well up within this space, producing a difference. And it's contained energy. Just like a bubble is contained gas within water, or within air, or whatever the bubble's in. And by bringing them together, it makes these deeper energy structures. Strange to say, you see, when it's completed this process, where does it go then? Well, it actually goes into the heart of the physical atoms that it's produced, the end result. And in terms of our Earth, it resides at the centre of the Earth, at the core. And from there, it seeks to return back to its source, in the Logos, through manifest beings. Now,
so that's the upwards.
It wants to evolve back to its source, because it is just a primary force. So in order to do that, it has to hitch a ride on the secondary force or second Logos, which is Mahat, which to all intents and purposes is mind, is soul, right? And what Mahat does is enters into these planes now, one by one, drawing up these bubbles into forms that it can live in, that it can express itself within. And it does this first of all on the spiritual plane and then on the next plane and so forth. And this process is called involution. But by the time it gets to the physical plane, it's the word I'm looking for is inside. It's dwelling and vivifying physical matter, the mineral kingdom. So if you break up mineral atoms, if you could do that, you'll find Mahat is actually the spiritual spark within them. It's the spark of consciousness within those crude mineral atoms. When the process goes a lot further, it ends up producing forms we call vegetables and living in that kingdom and making that semi-conscious. Then finally it produces forms that we call animals and expresses within those, and we call those conscious now. And then eventually it produces forms we call humans, which we're walking about in, and we call those self-aware forms of consciousness. So you and I have an intelligence. That intelligence is Maha, the second Logos, which is ensouling this form. Now, so this is a bit like saying Fohat makes all these building materials, Maha comes along and builds things with them, houses and palaces and lives in them. And we did go into this a bit in the last one, didn't we? What happens eventually is so what is taking place now is I was trying to tell you about Fohat hitching a ride back to its source, because inside every atom, inside every organism, inside every plant, inside every earthworm and every elephant and every animal, and inside every human being is a force called Kundalini. So when Fohat's finished its involutionary journey and produced all its material, it waits. When the forms come along produced by Mahat, the divine mind, it then gives those forms its life. This electricity that vivifies all life. If you took Fohat out of an atom, it would break up and fall apart. If you took consciousness out of the atom, it would just go to sleep. But Fohat is that which vivifies everything. So in a human being, it is vivifying every atom, it's giving life to every atom, electricity to every atom in your body. But it's also giving life to you as an organ, as a complete organism, by rising up the spine from the ground and you emerging in the chakras and running through all the different meridians and channels and making that connection between the second Logos, which is the mind, and the first Logos, and the third Logos, which is Fohat, which is the body, so that the mind can experience through the senses, which the body is composed using to experience. So your vision, your touch, your sense of smell, your hearing, all the senses are connected via the power of Fohat, connecting you with Mahat, which is the mind. Now the triple Logos, I said it was a triple Logos, so there's still one aspect yet to operate. And that doesn't come in until somewhere during the human kingdom, the early part of the human kingdom. When mind has established itself in the human being to the point where the human being has become awakened to itself. This process is by the first Logos coming down through the planes and sparking the mind into higher activity. This is higher activity I'm talking about, is the power of imagination, creative thinking, of abstract thinking, of memory proper rather than just instinctive behaviour. And so we see the difference between the animal and vegetable kingdoms in that there's an instinctive behaviour going on there, which is mind, but in its rudimentary form. When you get to the human kingdom, mind becomes creative, a creative force. And so they say, therefore, that spirit sleeps in the mineral, dreams in the vegetable, awakens in the animal, and becomes self-aware in the human being. So I think we can see from that then that the mechanism of the Big Bang is full hat. It does have to sort of burst into new states, which, when it comes to the physical plane, must have been one hell of an effort to break through into that density of matter, to be able to organise that density of matter. And I suppose, in a way, you could call that a Big Bang, because it's bursting through an interface between one plane and another. But it isn't the beginning. It's almost the end, in fact. And I can't say where I could find reference to this, but my memoried perception is that Fohat springs up in the universe in multiple places at once, not one. So when science looks out into the cosmos and sees things moving away from what it sees as a central point, it may only be looking at a locality. And if it could see beyond that, it may see another system of movement come away from another point and so forth. That would make more sense to me anyway than just one single point, because this is the nature of Fohat. It wells up within that space, not from one point but from many. So let's just see if there's anything left to look into on that. Yeah. So, is it the next session where we look at involution and evolution? I think it is, isn't it? Yes. So what we're going to do in that session is we're going to look at how life actually organises itself on those planes, and then eventually evolves back to its divine source. So we look at the detail then more than we are now. So, is there any questions about this Big Bang cosmology thing?
I think that some scientists have already identified several places where the atoms are moving away.
Have they?
Yeah. There's two camps now. There's a Big Bang that comes from one, and there's another set of scientists that are saying they can identify it moving away in several places.
Right.
So, and also Amit Goswami has got a new book out, and he's a scientist who is also a theosophist.
Yes.
And it's advertised in the Cygnus magazine that's just out this month. So that it's about £12 to buy.
He's a quantum physicist. He's
yes.
also a theosophist, a lecturer.
He's really inspiring to watch and listen to.
He's written a few books.
Very technical.
This is a new one.
And you see, one of the theories that's come out in the last 10 years or so is called string theory. And that's very much like this stringing together that we were talking about, isn't it? Yeah. Because, going back to what I said at the beginning, the way these things work, the way life works, is it repeats patterns. So when it finds a pattern that works, it repeats it in all forms that it can possibly do. In the same way that the physical plane is a repetition of the spiritual plane, albeit on a denser field. But the pattern is the same. And this is the sort of saving grace, if you like, of metaphysics. It's a complicated, deep subject, but once you start to get these patterns, they then apply to everything. So, it's like one size then fits all, really, and it helps you to cut across all the complications. In this process, of course, there are other beings that emerge from previous universes, and we're talking about hierarchy of archangels and so forth. We'll go more deeply into those in the next session as well.
And what about the universe expanding? But it won't contract, it'll just bam and expand.
You know, when we first started the meetings in Bangor in 2002, there was a student from Bangor University came to join us after a couple of months. I forget her name now. She was only about 19 and doing a degree, and we did a simple course on Theosophy. And at one point, I was asking for questions, and at one point she said, well, if you think about it, she said, what you've told us is that if you're on one plane, say you're on the astral plane, to you that's the physical world. And if you're on the mental plane, that's the real world as well. How do we know, now that we're on the physical world, that there isn't another world even heavier? Now, I'd never heard that idea put.
No, Eric, when you were talking a little while ago, I was thinking about it all starting off and being remembered and built in, and the struggle Holyhead has to. But 7 is the number for our universe, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there could be other, a repetition of this one, but on. And I thought, well, what's to stop Holyhead going beyond that? And I thought it's because that's the 7th plane, and that's it for now.
Yeah, and I think that's more or less how I answered her question. But that still leaves in question that in some future universe at some point, that it may go beyond the 7 and therefore produce another heavier plane, or maybe it doesn't need to. Who knows? But what we can say is, we can't say that there would be an 8th plane, but we can say that there was a single plane, and a dual plane, and a triple plane, and a. So that tells me that way back, before we reached the septenary system, there would be a singular system, which is just the absolute itself, isn't it? Mm. And then when that starts to, first of all, produce something, it produces a dual system, whose number is 2. And its limit is 2, and then a triple system where its limit is a trinity, and all these things are just done up to 3, and then 4, then 5, then 6, and now 7. So it does beg the question: will there be an 8-fold universe at some point in the future? Not very relevant to us, but it's of interest.
I once heard someone say, if you can imagine it, it can happen.
Well, yeah.
The very fact you can imagine it.
And if you think about it, then you see that's what the divine mind is. Mahat is doing. It's the power of mind. It's the mind of nature, and it's pushing. When it's building all these forms, it's pushing itself beyond its limits every time it does this. It's imagining even more. And you and I are doing the same thing, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, because we talk about things which say, well, that's unimaginable. Well, it is now, but as our minds expand and we get into cosmic consciousness, what of our imagination then? Mm-hmm. And this is another part of Theosophy which blows my mind, really, is that we're only just somewhere along this process. We're not at the end of it by any means at all. So as we go forward, things are going to get more and more incredible, and our power of consciousness is going to expand more and more. And we're still like children, really. We've still got a lot of growing up to do. But in terms of this number 7 thing, we may be on a sticky wicket saying that it's go beyond that, possibly, because metaphysics has told us, or pointed out, that well, actually, as I think my way through that, I'm going to have to give it up because I've already gone past that. I was going to say that the number 7 is inherent in the system because of the way it numerologically works out. but
in this system.
but 8 would work out just the same, thinking about it, yeah. And so, and we know 9 does, and 12, 10 and 12. I mean, the Kabbalah is based on 10, isn't it, Kabbalah? And that's a good system, it works very, very well. Some systems are worked on 12, as in the 12 disciples and all the rest of it. I think. So yeah, who knows? Yeah.
But for us, it's 7, and this is the most densest.
For us, it's 7. Yeah.
Well, I think it's the limit that it's reached, which is the physical plane, which is the 7th real push from spirit to matter.
Yeah.
It's the 7th, and it gets locked in the physical plane because it's time to return. Fohat is the force that's pushing out, but it has to be
Contained.
It has to act within Mahat, which is the mind of nature, and therefore it has to come back in Fohat. In Kundalini, sorry.
It has to come back.
Yeah.
In the evolution of the species.
In the evolution of the force.
Ruth said that she'd been away and she wanted to be woke up if she went to sleep, and she just went to sleep, but now she woke up again.
Oh, right.
So Ruth went into a little pralaya. Now she's back with us again. So what this is it. See, what Theosophy gives us is a totally higher view of the world around us. It gives us a view where we see everything as living, conscious beings, and something that we're all part of, and it's all part of us. And this is where learning through deep thinking turns into mysticism, where the occult becomes the mystic. And it has been said, and I fully subscribe to it, that the occult and the mystic within each of us must come together finally on the one path. You see, because the occultist wants to know everything, wants to understand everything, wants to probe everything. It's a scientist. But the mystic wants to experience everything. It's the mystical, the yogi. And they're both two sides of the same coin. But the coin itself, when they come together and blend in one person, is wisdom. The occult path and the mystical path become the path of wisdom, where the two are resolved. So, there we are.
What actually happens to time when you become at one, say, with the flower, and it seems as though time has slowed down to such a degree that it feels like you're walking on the moon, say. But has in actual fact the opposite happened? That time has quickened up so much?
well, that's an arbitrary point, isn't it? I think the reason why time seems to have shifted at all is that when you reach that moment of oneness with another thing, you're actually seeing it from your higher mind, not your lower mind. You see it from your spiritual consciousness rather than your physical consciousness. You've moved that little degree higher in awareness, and at that point time isn't like it is here. If you go deeper, you'll find you can reach a point where you realise you've always been in that one moment, right? And there's never been any other moment. But then you have. So, but because when you get to that deeper point of spiritual awareness, time is not relative like it is here. It's not relative the same on the astral. When you're dreaming, time is different to your waking time, and that's why, because it's a shift in consciousness, Ruth, that gives you a different impression of time. Time hasn't stopped, it hasn't slowed, it hasn't speeded up. It's simply shifted to a different viewpoint, because we don't understand time at all. It's an abstract concept which science can't explain, And I don't think philosophers can.
It's something that we've invented, really, isn't it? Time to sort of be able to compartmentalise things.
Yeah, well,
when you do things.
Yeah, as we've evolved, we've learned to compartmentalise everything in sequential order, and I think creatures do this in order to survive at their own level. But when it comes to human beings, they're very sophisticated because we have such a very strong power of memory, which is not just instinctive memory; it's actually functioning memory proper, where we can access it. We can do a search. So if I say to you, "Which school did you go to?" you can do a quick mental search and remember. But if you come down to the lower kingdoms, that can't happen. But then they know the next thing to do. They know instinctively which is where's best to go and where's not best to go, mostly. So when we get to the human kingdom, we've compartmentalised and sequentialised things to a very sophisticated degree. And in that we call it the movement of time. But it's only a convenient expression for how we perceive things, isn't it? It's all down to perception.
But even in your everyday life, there are incidents that have certainly that have happened to me that in my ordinary time I couldn't have done what I did.
But that's called daydreaming.
No. I was once a taxi without any stopping lights stopped in front of me in Liverpool, and I knew I had my foot on the brake, but I knew I wasn't, but it didn't happen just like that. It slowed
down,
slow. And when I hit his boot, the lid
you actually hit this taxi, yeah?
I hit his boot, and the lid of the boot went up. Slowly,
yeah.
And down, and it went up again. And I thought, I couldn't handle it. But something must have just lifted me out of my ordinary time.
Yes.
And let me see that.
Everything in slow motion.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's very strange, isn't it?
But I think we're just kidding ourselves with time.
Yeah, we are kidding ourselves, yeah. Most drivers have had the experience of coming home from somewhere late at night and they're tired, and then they're driving home and then they sort of wake up and realise, well, how did I get here? And then think back and think, goodness me, I've been through 2 roundabouts, sets of traffic lights and half a motorway. I don't remember any of it. How did I drive all that way? I've been asleep. But, some part of consciousness has gone off, but another part is dealing, we call it the body elemental actually, dealing with the driving bit.
Yeah.
When I was a driving instructor in the 70s, early 70s, and I'd just started to learn to come out of my body, I reached a point at one point where I was giving a lesson and I saying to this pupil, when you get to the roundabout, take the 3rd exit. And then I was coming out of my body and I was on the roundabout watching the car coming towards me and thinking, he's in the wrong lane. And I was back in my body saying, you're in the wrong lane. So I had to do something about that. I had to stop that. But it was quite fascinating to think I could actually be outside the car looking at it in time to tell her to get in a different lane. So it is a strange phenomenon of time, and none more so than when you're dreaming, is it? Really.
But when the family had no idea I was in this stage.
Well, no, they wouldn't.
Slowed time. To them,
no, they were in their normal state, weren't they? Yeah.
Was dead,
just
slow. The cooking, the washing, and to somebody looking, there was no strangeness.
No.
No strangeness.
You see this in science fiction films, don't you? Where someone's had the ability to speed up themselves or something, and they're moving through a crowd, and the crowd's like that.
Yeah.
There's a cup of tea on its way to the carpet, but it hasn't got there yet. and he's going through. All these ideas come from the reality of the fact that we do experience these shifts in time. Some very strange things have happened. When a newspaper advert was placed in the New York Times many years ago, asking for people with experiences of time shifting. Lots of people said they got into lifts, various lifts, or elevators in America, on the ground floor, and went to go to the fourth floor or whatever. When they got out on the fourth floor, they were back in the 1930s or some other time, and they had to get back in the lift to come back to their normal time. I mean, you know, where's that at? But you see, these are all mysteries that will reveal themselves to us as our consciousness expands, and we can see things from a higher point of view. Like the moment when you look at the flower, if you could live with that power of consciousness, you would see time in a totally different way. And maybe this is why.
Like that for days.
Well, yeah. Some would say you never come out of it. This is why some yogis can predict the actual time of their death to the minute, 20 years in advance.
Yes.
Because they've been there, seen it, they can see it's going to happen. And when that time comes, just sitting in a chair with their favourite drink, listen to their favourite Mozart, and exactly on the time, they just die. Goodbye.
But then can shock take you into that moment?
Yeah, shock, illness, drugs, of course, anaesthetics.
Like watching an accident, because I was in my car spun, and there again everything slowed down. You could see it happening.
Triggered by shock, definitely triggered by shock. Okay, well, thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.